On episode 573 of the 40 Plus Fitness Podcast, we meet Ivor Cummins and discuss the science in health and nutrition. You can find the full show notes for this episode at 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/573. Have you decided you're ready to make a change? To reclaim your health and fitness? The 40 Plus Fitness Podcast is here for you. Each week, we dive deep into health and fitness topics that affect those of us over 40. I'm Coach Allen. I'm an NASM certified personal trainer with specializations in corrective exercise, behavior change, performance enhancement, and fitness nutrition. A Precision Nutrition Level 1 coach, a FAI certified functional age-linked specialist, and an OTA Level 2 online trainer. Each week, I'm joined by our co-host, Coach Rachel. She is an NASM certified personal trainer and a RRCA Level 1 run coach. Let us be your coaches as you find your way on your health and fitness journey. All right, let's go. You're right on that edge. You want to improve your health and fitness, but you just can't pull the trigger and stick with it. Some people call it a lack of motivation. Some people tell me they're just overwhelmed and don't know what to do or how to do it. Some tell me that there's just too much going on and they just can't do more with the time they have. And some tell me they can't afford to get help. I've been where you are, and it sucks. If you're really honest with yourself, you know you need to improve your health and fitness, and you know time is not on your side. The slide of aging is pulling you down. This is something you need to do today. I'm here to help. Get on a free discovery call. On this call, we'll map out where you are and where you need to be. I'll tell you the very next step you need to take to make that happen. And that's all. I won't even offer coaching on this call because if you're going to stick with your excuses, coaching won't help. Book your complimentary call at 40plusfitness.com/discovery. Invest 30 minutes with me, 40plusfitness.com/discovery, and figure out what you need to do to break through and find your way to the health and fitness you deserve. 40plusfitnesspodcast.com/discovery. Hey, Raz, how are things?
Good, Alan. How are you today?
Doing good. Little tired.
Yeah.
We, again, we told you guys this a lot. We record this a few weeks in advance, a couple weeks in advance, and so this is a holiday here, the New Year's holiday, and so we've made the decision this year to give our staff the time off. And I know I've talked about doing that and own, but it's quite a different thing when you've got 13 breakfasts and you got 3 rooms to clean, and this person wants to rent bikes and that person needs this, and then someone needs a ride there, and some people have to be picked up there, and then you have to wait for this couple to show up and you don't know when they're here. And so it's just one of these move, and then you finally get that opportunity to sit down and record, and I just take a nap.
Oh geez. Oh my goodness. Oh.
And then, roll it through my head. It's like, okay, I got to get a bottle of water upstairs because they're about out there, and then, got to make sure that all the laundry that needs to be done, the linens we pulled off of the beds and all that still gets done. And so, I've got a laundry list of about a dozen things in my head right now that
oh gosh,
there probably won't be a nap immediately.
Oh,
there probably will be a nap somewhere today.
that sounds good. Good plan.
Yeah. How are things up there?
Good. We made it through Christmas, made it through New Year's. Now it's about getting back to schedule again. I miss having routines and schedules and just getting back to normal. My sleep's disrupted too, so I just feel wonky.
And I saw this insane picture of you standing in water in Michigan.
Yeah. Yep. And on New Year's Day, our Fun Run Club organizes a polar plunge, and on the lake that we use, had a pretty good base of ice. In fact, it was kind of a struggle to chop through to make a little hole for us to do our little
Okay,
polar plunge.
that's everything. Nature, God, everything saying don't.
Oh, it's exhilarating. It really is. I look forward to it every year. I get really excited in December that this is coming up. And yes, it is super cold and there's a lot of screaming going on, but it is really a lot of fun. And I just feel like it's like washing off the bad luck of last year and getting myself ready and prepared for the upcoming year. It's kind of a great day, and it's a lot of fun. So
I have a completely different description of it, but myself.
well, truth be told, I am no stranger to ice baths. And as an endurance runner, I am known to take an ice bath with lots of ice in the bathtub after a run. So I'm no stranger to any of it. I enjoy it. It is exhilarating. It is a challenge, but yeah, it's also a lot of fun.
Yeah. And that's why, when I say there's no one way to do any of this, there's no one way, and there's no
That's
way
right.
putting me in that water. But
yep.
I mean, Pensacola, I might have considered it, but
oh yeah,
I'm not doing that up there. For having to peck through the ice to make it happen. That's
Yep. It was a fun time.
Well, good.
Yep.
You conversation with Ivor?
Sure.
Our guest today is called the Fat Emperor because he dissected the science behind low fat and found it was based on nothing. Science did not support that way of eating. He is an engineer specializing in complex problem solving, and he has turned his attention towards nutrition and health science, peeling back the layers to find the truth. In many cases, the answer is contrary to what you've been told by the media and government. Today, we discuss some of that science and lack thereof. With no further ado, here's Ivor Cummins. Ivor, welcome to 40 Plus Fitness.
Well, thanks a lot, Alan. Great to be here.
I'm hyper excited. I mean, I'm like a little fanboy right here now because I've heard you speak, and it's something else. I was like, if you can get out and listen to this guy, if you can get on his YouTube channel, you've got to go meet him, because Ivor is a no nonsense, data driven individual that he doesn't just take the headline. You go in and you drill, and you learn a lot of interesting things. And I've learned a lot of interesting things by listening to you.
Yeah, well, thanks, Alan. It's my background, really. I was a complex problem solver in corporate for, I know, a couple of decades, leading teams, and it's always what I specialized in. So I don't dig into everything. Some things I judge they're not of huge value to understand more deeply, but it's like breadth and depth, as we used to say. Breadth on capturing the full picture of any kind of topic or arena, and then depth where necessary based on your skill and judgment to go into depth where there's value.
Well, like I said, your YouTube channel is pure gold. The depth and the breadth there is just fascinating. I got caught up in that rabbit hole the other day while I was prepping for this interview, and I just one video after the other. And so the funny thing, I was watching one of your videos, and you finished the video, and I was kind of piddling with something else, and you know how YouTube will take you on to the next video, just some other video. It wasn't yours. There was some newscast, and they were talking about fusion energy and how someone might have cracked fusion energy. And so now I'm hooked on, they knew I wanted to see this, so they got me. But that's when it hit me. It's like, we know what fusion energy is. If you know enough about science and you've studied it a little bit, you know what that is. And there's a science, a hard science between what that is, how you define something like fusion. Why is it that when we do science around food and health, it never quite gets to that same level of science? Well, why is science not science when it comes to food and health?
Oh, yeah, it's a big question. Well, I think, the theoretical sciences and physics and mathematics have stayed pretty poor, or pure, I should say, not poor, pure. And they've stuck with the scientific method of create a hypothesis and then seek to destroy the hypothesis, ideally, not just to support it with your cognitive or belief bias. And they've just stuck to science, and they've been allowed to, really, because there's no mass market, particularly in kind of fusion and theoretical physics. So they were allowed to continue, as we did for hundreds of years, stick to the science. However, health and food are the two biggest markets on the planet, basically. So the processed food industry is enormous, as you well know, and we've got this ownership model over the last 30 years where a few corporations own the whole lot. And that's just the way the world is. And then the health market, well, we've got big pharma, and they have enormous funds and influence on medical training, doctors training, and funding studies and funding trials. So they bring all the money to direct the science. So I think that's a high level view. They've been co-opted. And, with the FDA, the revolving door, the head of the FDA becomes the head of some pharma group, and vice versa. So basically, industry, capitalism has been very successful over particularly the last 40 or 50 years to essentially take over largely the science of both food, nutrition, and health. Not exercise per se, but then there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, grifters in exercise as well. These are all big markets, and that's essentially the bottom line. They are huge markets, and there's no way they're going to be let just bumble along scientifically.
So, if I see a study and the headline reads that you should be eating beets 5 times a day, every day, and only beets, other than that, just sounded absurd to say it out loud, but how would I know when I'm looking at a study that this isn't something that was just, I'm not going to say made up, but that there was a cognitive bias or there were confounders, or was something wrong with the science or the way they're describing the output?
Yeah, well, the first thing is always the funding. The funding and the ideology. So many times you'll find with a study that seems odd and is in conflict with what you would expect, it may go back to a particular strong ideology like veganism, or a university associated with that, or vegetarian leaning, or there could be a climate aspect to the funding. Or, of course, there could be food industry and pharma can be in there. So it doesn't prove that the study is bad, but if your antennae go up at all, look to the authors, look them up online, find out, are they a particular extreme diet aficionado, and indeed where the funding's coming from. The other thing then are associational studies. If it says appears that, or seems that, or tracks with, or all these kinds of clues, and they don't actually say this is a proven thing, it's often an associational study. So that's the basic correlation versus causation thing. So I give a quick example. We pretty much know, because you can never know anything for 100% in science, but we know that the factory seed oils, the vegetable oils, the heart-healthy oils, we know they're not a good idea compared to real food. However, for 40 or 50 years, the population has been screamed at to eat the vegetable oils and don't eat the natural saturated fats. So what's happened is, over 50 years, the health-focused people who are focused on their health tend to listen to the advice from the scientists and the health officials, right? So they tend to eat more vegetable oils. But what happens then is you've got a healthy user bias, i.e., after 40 years, you can look at the data and you can see some better health outcomes in the populations that eat a little more vegetable oils. And it's not because they're healthy, it's because for 40 years, you've kind of ruined the pitch. You've ruined the experiment, because the healthier people who are worried about their health, who have better outcomes, well, they've tended to take more of the oils. So that's just an example of confounding, extreme confounding in an associational or epidemiological study. But there are many more. People who eat more saturated fat, and it is related, they tend to not care about advice. They are shown again and again to have more smoking, more overweight, more bad habits of various sorts, lack of exercise. So you see these signals. But the author of the study is only looking for one message. In this case, healthy vegetable oils are healthy. We were right all along, honest.
Yeah, the way I like to think about cause and correlation is that if you go to a fire, there's a lot of firemen around. So if maybe it's the firemen that are starting the fire, that's not the case. It's just because the way we address fires, there's always going to be firemen at a fire. And so you can't get rid of the firemen to think that that's what's going to get rid of the fire. But it sounds, again, kind of silly just when you say that kind of stuff out loud, but and sometimes when you're reading the studies, that's exactly what they're saying. We see this thing here, therefore we know there's a problem. If we get rid of this thing, we won't have the problem, and it's not really the cause. So let's talk. You dived into it a little bit. You started talking about veganism, vegetarian, and animal-based foods and saturated fat. You've talked to a lot of people. You've done a lot of research in this area yourself, digging. Is animal-based foods good for us or bad for us, or in the middle somewhere, maybe? I don't...
Yeah, well, so whole, real, natural foods that would be strongly associated with our evolution as a species, they are the best foods. They are the best diet. Unless you have weird, compelling data to say otherwise, right? It makes sense. And paleoanthropologists, almost to a man or a woman, Dr. Michael Eads, a good friend of mine, often has said this, and it's true. They will all acknowledge that Homo sapiens evolved, right, by the scavenging of animal carcasses. Now, we started off scavenging organ meats and even brain, etc., and we cracked open bones. The tools are all there in the record, every human tribe going back to day dot. And then we moved on to hunting. We became more and more successful as hunters. And the one ancestor of humans, Dr. Eads actually sent me this before that debate I did, and it was beautiful. And it was from one of his talks I'd missed. And it showed that around 1 million years ago, there were these striding kind of hominids, two-legged creatures that became us. And there were various branches, and they found one dead-end branch. And there was no reason for it at first, that this branch had completely died off, and the other branch had gone on to become humans, the most successful species on the planet, you could say. And that branch actually was one where it stayed vegetarian. So, of course, it didn't have access to the nutrient density of meats and organ meats. It didn't trade off its digestive, large stomach size to enable a huge brain calorie drain like we did. It just stayed more like an ape with a big stomach and a brain, nothing to write home about. So even there, and in everything in the anthropological research and fossil records, all says again and again, this is how we got here. So there's that. And then when you look at the mechanistic, you say, okay, what's the nutrient density of meats and fish and eggs? And boom, it's got massive nutrient density and much more bioavailability of key proteins than any plant food. Doesn't mean plant foods are no good. They carry minerals and vitamins and various proteins that you can convert. But the animal foods are clearly way ahead of the game. So without going into great detail, but I'll give an example, B12. You can have severe mental illness from being low in B12, and it only comes from animal foods. I mean, duh, there's a giveaway. I mean, yeah. Come on. And you could go on, but all these other components that are in animal foods and the fats match the fats of what our body makes our fat out of is mono and saturated fat. That's what human bodies make for safe storage of energy. And that's what we get from animal foods, very well matched fat balance to what we are made of. So there's all of that mechanistic stuff and nutrients and bioavailability. That's a no-brainer. So now you've got the ancestral evolutionary, and it's basically almost a proof in itself. It's hard to argue with. And then you've got what I just mentioned, including components, and DHA, EPA are another one that are almost, you can't get anywhere else, right? So then you say, wow, with these foods we evolved on, they have vastly higher nutrient density and even contain nutrients that we actually need or we'll get very ill. And you put that together. And then at this stage, you're kind of there, right? Obviously, they're the healthful foods for those reasons. But the world, for ideological reasons, has spent definitely the last 40 years, particularly the last 10 years, and bringing in climate as well as an argument, right? Climate change. But going back to the Adventist church and the huge industries they own, it goes back to the turn of the century and Harvey Kellogg, who perceived masturbation as sinful and quite rightly probably said, if we feed them gruel instead of meat, they'll be less, active. And he actually had a point there, in a sense. So carnal knowledge, and even the Bible, carna has all these negative associations. For thousands of years, kings would tell the poor people, meat is bad for you. That the top strata always indicated, the Bible said it, vegetarian churches say it. All of these reasons that meat is bad are ideological, or even worse, they're a power play of sorts, a feudalism. And that's all there is against meat. As an example, the big one, WHO a few years ago came out with a study and said meat is now a grade 2 carcinogen and processed meat is a grade 1, I think. The data in that, they said we looked at 1,000 studies, and they kind of did. And none of them said that. But they used associational epidemiological data within them and maybe a mouse study to come to the conclusion that meat's a carcinogen, which is de facto absurd. And that's the tip of the iceberg. There's 1,000 studies now, all driven by ideology, whether climate, religious, or just general dietary ideologies.
Yeah, the debate that you were talking about, that was with Dr. Greger. I've had him on the show, and he wrote his book, How Not to Die. It's actually a good book, and he goes into science in the book, as he does with his normal video. I guess it's a video cast, a podcast thing, well produced, put together. But you're right, most of the studies that he covers are really one-sided. And I've had conversations with vegans, and I say, well, we've got to talk about B12, and they're like, well, yeah, you might have to supplement with B12, but carnivores have to supplement with statins.
Talk about a false equivalence.
Oh. Yeah, but that's the conversation, and you touched on something that I really think is important, because I have had vegans on the show, I've had carnivores on the show, I've had raw paleo, I've had a vegan that was keto. So I mean, I try to get a broad view of different people on the show, so at least they can present their ideas in a fair location where I'm not going to beat them up for the way that they want to live and that they think others should. But it's whole food. If I ask a vegan, why do you feel like your diet is the best? And they're like, well, it's a whole food, plant-based diet. And I'm like, okay. And I ask a carnivore, why do you feel like your diet's the best? And it's basically a whole food, animal-based diet. And so they always go back to this is a whole food diet. And one of the reasons why that diet is bad is because they're eating all the processed crap. And and it's true. And so you look at some of the studies and you're like, well, if like the Seventh Adventists you brought up, if they're following the doctrine of what their religion is, they would be vegan or vegetarian. But they go through the ranks and they say, okay, here's the people that aren't doing it, and here's the ones that are, and the ones that are doing it are healthier. but they don't factor in well, they also aren't supposed to smoke. So the ones that are doing it also aren't smoking, but those guys are. And, there are other risky behaviors. So their all-cause mortality is worse, but they never really pull that out. And I think that's what I really struggle with these studies, is when they go in with that cognitive bias, or, worse, financial bias, it just creates wonky science, and someone will refer to that study forevermore in their study. So it's like, we know cholesterol is bad, therefore, and then they do their study to basically, and they draw a conclusion. And sometimes you're right, they do play with the words, appears as if, or kind of thing. But it just seems like it's really hard for people to know what to do to be healthy. And it's a shame that we can't depend on the governments to step up and do a little bit of house cleaning here.
Yeah, the challenge is, Alan, so ideology, and again, I didn't say anything negative about them, and you can get along pretty well eating vegetables because you are giving up all the processed food, which is the real poison. My only angle was it's more optimum and better to get the nutrient density of the foods we primarily evolved on. But I mean, Homo sapiens are very adaptable, and we were able to go long periods when there was very little game, and we evolved to be able to handle quite a lot of plant food and a lack of animal foods for periods. But evolution didn't really plan for long periods, and especially didn't plan for vegan. Vegetarian, especially ovo-lacto, evolution well prepared us for that. But vegan, like you say, you need B12. And Dr. Joel Kahn, a good friend of mine, who's a hardcore vegan, he's in his 60s, looks great, and he's got a 0 calcium scan in his 60s. But one reason is, for 20 years, he's been imploring vegans to take a whole range of supplements. And he acknowledges and puts the hand up and doesn't try and pretend that the vegan diet is a complete diet. He's interested for ideological reasons, and he admits it's ideology by saying, vegan guys, don't let our side down. You need to take these supplements. And that's why he's so healthy. But the funny thing is, Alan, even these, like Okinawa, everyone talks about Okinawan's plant-based longevity, but the people who reached 100 in Okinawa, I think it was 5 out of 5 or 6 out of 6 in one study, all of them were non-vegetarian. They were the cluster that really went the distance. And the other thing is, they went to Okinawa, and this is where all this stuff came from. In the early 50s, after World War II, half the population on the islands had been were dead. I mean, Okinawa, there was horrific stuff that went on there, as we know. But before the war, pork was highly prized. In fact, it's in their literature, their culinary literature. Pork is at the center of Okinawan dishes. It's written in some old text. And after the war, they had no pigs for obvious reasons. And within a few years, they went up from, I think they were before the war, 110 pigs per 1,000 people. It's pretty high density. And they went up to 150 per 1,000 people by the late 50s and early 60s. So they went back on track, a pork-based diet. But you don't hear that. You hear just when they found them starving post-war with their whole infrastructure and their animals all dead. That's when they did the study, and that's the study you hear quoted.
Yeah, that's the Ansel Keys 7-country study that there were 23
that
countries.
Well. And he picked from 22.
Okay,
he picked like 6 from 22 the first time, the 6-country study, which was just toilet paper. And then he created the toilet paper pseudo experiment. 12,000 men, no women, 7 countries picked from around 20. And he knew in advance. It's like an engineer who's cheating, right, to get a raise. Ansel knew the countries that would give him the outcome. I mean, it's so stupid. But he wanted the outcome because Ansel himself was in the grip of ideology. He was nowhere within 1,000 miles of a scientist. He was an ideological person who had a grasp of scientific kind of stuff. And he was hugely influential, and he was a extremely capable politician too. He weaseled his way in everywhere, and he destroyed the career of Yudkin in the UK, questioned his data, and he went after Yudkin hardcore and basically destroyed his career in a sense. So that's the kind of man Ancel Keys was. So it's not surprising that the science he produced was junk science.
Yeah, and unfortunately, we still see that stuff happening today with different things going on in the world. Pick a side and then fight to the death. It seems to be the mode of operation for this. Now, you mentioned Dr. Khan, and I've read some of his stuff, and you've had a lot of other notable heart health doctors on your show. If someone's in their 40s, 50s, or older and wants to manage their heart health so that they can live a longer, happier life, what are the things that we could be doing to improve our overall heart health?
Right. Okay, then, Alan. So we'll start at the top, and sometimes I and others get criticized that insulin, we say, is everything. It's like the one ring to rule them all. Now, we do emphasize insulin, but in a Pareto principle way, because it's the elephant in the room. It's the biggest factor, your insulin resistance, in cardiac disease and Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes. It's often referred to now. And even Parkinson's has been referred to by one or two specialists as potentially type 4 diabetes. And then we have type 2, of course, which has massive impacts on shortening your life. So that's actual diabetes. And then we have type 1 diabetes. And type 0 diabetes, I used to jokingly refer to heart disease as type 0 diabetes, because as Professor Joe Kraft, who I interviewed in Chicago, who tested 15,000 people for a 5-hour insulin glucose test, he said, let me think if I can just think of his quote. Those who die of coronary disease who do not have diabetes are simply undiagnosed. And he was inferring that nearly all cardiac disease and vascular disease is essentially type 2 diabetes, whether diagnosed or not. Now, I don't think he's correct on that, but the massive majority is. And a great example for people is the EuroAspire study done in Europe in 2015. And you should see the pie chart. I featured it many times. And this team went out, a large team, went across 24 countries of Europe. Think about it. Looked at heart disease victims or patients ages 18 to 80. So they looked at all ages, not just old people who tend to get it. And they basically checked their blood glucose in detail. And they found out straight away, shockingly, that around a third of them were type 2 diabetic on their medical record. And they thought, whoa, they didn't expect to find a full third of them. But then they looked at their glucose and post glucose load glucose readings, and they realized another quarter were full-blown type 2, undiagnosed. But then another quarter were high risk for type 2 diabetes, they called it, but they were type 2 diabetic. They just didn't quite reach the very high bar to be full-blown. So essentially 3/4, roughly, of all the heart disease patients across Europe, 24 countries, ages 18 to 80, as a huge supergroup, 3/4 were type 2 diabetic. I mean, come on. Yeah. So Kraft was very close. And if you measured their insulin, and this team did not, sadly, but if they did a Kraft test, myself, Dr. Gerber, and Professor Noakes, and everyone in our community reckons probably 85+% would be essentially physiologically diabetic. So heart disease, first thing you do is minimize your insulin resistance, get insulin sensitive.
And that's through diet and exercise.
Diet and exercise. Diet is enormous in insulin resistance, but funny things are sleep and stress. They've done studies that if people are stressed, their insulin goes way up. Deny people sleep for a couple of weeks, their insulin resistance can double. Smoking massively pushes up your insulin. It's one of the mechanisms of damage. And if you give up smoking, your insulin resistance falls sharply. Even pollution, and of course, lack of exercise. And we would say, myself and Dr. Gerber or Dr. Ted Naiman or Ben Bocacchio, all the people in our network, stress training, pushing to failure with weights and body weight exercise, maybe 20 minutes twice, 3 times a week, a lot more bang for the buck than cardiometabolic exercise, running, though that has its place too. So exercise, food, the big thing is to take out Satan's triad. That's what I call it. Sugar, refined carbs, refined grains, refined wheats, all these powdered carbohydrates, and vegetable oils, seed oils, inflammatory, seriously problematic. Those 3 things together, devil's triad. What are most calories in ultra-processed food, which makes up 80% of the supermarket, made up of? They're made up of the devil's triad. You don't have to look far here to see the reason for chronic disease. UK, British Medical Journal a few years ago, over 60% of all UK calories consumed now come from ultra-processed foods, which are mostly the devil's triad. I mean, most everyone is pouring large calorie quantities of kind of poisonous foods into themselves. It'd be amazing if we didn't have a tsunami of chronic disease. It would be astonishing. Cut out the devil's triad, cut out ultra-processed food, and whether you're vegetable leaning or you're carnivore or omnivore, like we said earlier, you said, Alan, if you cut out all the ultra-processed foods and just eat real foods, and maybe watch some supplementation as well, magnesium is very low in modern foods, and there's some more. You do that, you're miles ahead of the game. Add in fasting and some stress training. Doesn't have to be huge. You got this synergistic. You put yourself vastly ahead of the risk of the average person today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Again, it's it's been such a struggle. You did mention something earlier that I wanted to circle back around when you're talking about Dr. Khan and his calcium score. Could you talk a little bit about what a calcium score is and how we would go about getting one?
Right. Well, I spent many years massively pushing the calcium score, partly because my sponsor, one of Ireland's richest men, he got a huge score and he was slim, fit, running 4 times a week, 52 years old, and he got a score of 1,000, which is enormous. And he had 3 nearly fully blocked arteries, the main ones. So he got such a shock, he explored, and he found out what the calcium score was all about, because that's how he found out. They told him he was super healthy for years in executive medicals. Then he got one calcium scan. He found out he was destroyed inside. And then he personally found out, unsurprisingly, a few weeks later, not the doctors, he found out he was type 2 diabetic because he got a blood glucose meter and he began to hear from William Davis, MD, and others, checked his glucose, and it was 5 times normal after each meal. So that was David Bobbitt. Great work he's done. And he made the Widowmaker movie, and I'll give you the link to the 1-hour version on YouTube I put up. He spent $2 million to make this movie to tell people about the calcium scan. And the bottom line, Alan, is if you get a calcium scan, the score from that scan alone, single-handedly, is much more predictive of risk than all of the blood and the risk factors put together in Framingham and in the algorithms. Essentially, that score is more accurate predicting your future, though you can change it. Get a high score, you can fix the problem. That's key to note. But it's more predictive than all the risk factors put together. So if you get a score of 0 in middle age, your chance of a heart attack or mortality is so low, they actually call it a warranty. Now, a warranty doesn't mean 0%.
Yeah.
It means extremely low. You got a warrant. Fridge has a warranty, very seldom fails. So you might have a 0.5% chance or 1.2% of a heart event in the next 10 years. But the guys with the high scores like David Bobbitt's have up on 30% chance. You could have 20 plus times the risk of a heart attack, even though you got the same cholesterol as the guy beside you, because you have the disease. The calcium in the arteries, it is unequivocal. Calcium in your arteries is the direct proof and extent of vascular disease up till the day you get the scan. It's the scars in all your arteries where your body is trying to fix your arteries from atherosclerosis, the problem that causes heart attacks. So it's amazing. Where you get it, if you go to ihda.ie, so it's Irish Heart Disease Awareness.ie, there's the scan centers there, and we, over a year or two, developed a map of America, UK, and Ireland. Hard to get Europe, where all the centers are and their phone numbers. But in the US, you can get it from as low as $69 up to $200. Sometimes insurance covers it. In Europe, it's quite a bit more expensive, maybe $350 on average.
So yeah, if you have a family history of heart disease, or you know that there's a likelihood, you're overweight, you're over 40, you've got the risk factors, it's worth having that test done. So thank you for sharing that. If someone, I'm sorry, I jumped ahead. I define wellness as being the healthiest, fittest, and happiest you can be. What are 3 strategies or tactics to get and stay well?
Okay, and we probably touched on quite a few of them. I'd have to say, number one, and it ain't easy, and I commiserate with people, and I cheat sometimes too. Shocking to hear it. It's Christmas now, maybe a little, but I'm generally pretty good. Cut out the devil's triad enormously. And that does mean if you're going to get something in the supermarket, look in the back of it. Mayonnaise, 78% of it is rapeseed oil. It's vegetable oil. Imagine 80% of your mayonnaise. I checked. You can get these meals. You look in the back, you see added wheats and on the ingredients list. The things up the top of the ingredients list, at least in Europe, are the biggest components.
It's the same in the United States, yeah.
Yeah. So you see up in the first few, you see wheat, you see vegetable oils or any kind of vegetable oil. There's 50 names for them. That's bad. But you can get ready meals, convenience meals that are essentially a dinner in a foil tray in Ireland. It's just got meat, potatoes, carrots, and maybe a little bit of sugar. So you can get convenience food. That's okay. But the lesson is always say, is this real food? Is it nutrient dense? Is it not processed with wheats, refined grains, vegetable oils, and sugars? That's the biggest thing. I put diet first. The second biggest thing, I would say, of course, exercise is important. And I've gotten pretty sloppy over lockdown. When I began to do very little exercise, I was working 7 days a week in the office. I got kind of involved in a lot of challenging work, shall we say. But exercise, since I brought it back, and it's only really working on DIY and kind of house improvement, but working hard at it when I do it, even that has brought me back into a much, healthier and better sleeping mode. And I got an exercise bike as well I'm going to start using. So exercise, but as Ben Boccaccio and Dr. Ted Naiman and all of us say, just do the body weight exercises, press ups until failure, where you just can't do another one and your arms are screaming. Do 2 rounds of that, 2 rounds of sit-ups, 2 rounds of pull-ups. Always go till the muscles can't do anymore. There's no danger. There's no harm to your body, but it triggers more muscle growth. And that's a glucose sink. And that is just the healthiest thing you can get, muscle growth as you age. So exercise, particularly those resistance training exercises. Third thing then, I'd say I'm more and more focused on sleep. I have a Whoop device now, and it keeps me honest. So every morning, if I've had a good day, I go to bed on time, I don't have a few drinks, I get this great report in the morning from my Whoop, and it keeps me on track. If I do the bad thing, I get this nasty report, and it's never wrong. So I find it guides me, and the joy of getting a good sleep and then looking up your results. And indeed, you had good deep sleep, you had good REM, you had highly recovery prone sleep, and you got a high green recovery. I kind of run my life by this now. So I'd say sleep quality and managing stress. I know it's not easy. Stress is a killer, raises your cortisol, raises your insulin, eats away at your body, even undermines your immune system. So if you can get sleep, stress as the third thing sorted, and good food and good exercise will actually deliver the benefits in good sleep and reduce stress. So they're very much integrated together.
Thank you. Well, Ivor, if someone wanted to learn more about you and the work that you're doing, where would you like for me to send them?
Oh, right. I'd say if you just Google or search my name, Ivor Cummins, you'll quickly hit my YouTube, which is where a lot of the stuff is. And also my Twitter. I'm quite active on Twitter. And since the shadow banning stopped recently with Musk, suddenly my followers are growing again. I was perceived as questioning medical science at times, sadly. But I'm back on track. So Twitter is a good place. Often share reports, have technical arguments. And they're the main ones. And my pinned tweet at the moment, actually, and I think I'll leave it there, is linked to one of our latest conferences with 14 stunning speakers. And the whole package is available there of the 14 talks and the Q&As, which I moderated for every speaker. So that package is like, I don't know, 12 hours of pure gold. And if you watch that package, I think it's 29 bucks or something, I don't know. You know, it's just astonishing what all of our best guys have come out with in their talks. It's amazing. And the Q&As are revelatory as well, because we brought in people and they asked their questions, and myself and the speaker in each instance had that discussion. So all of that's in there.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And thank you for being a part of 40 Plus Fitness.
Oh, delighted to be here, Alan. And yeah, look forward to being back again. Great stuff.
Thank you. Welcome back, Raz.
Hey, Alan, that was a really fun interview. I can see why you enjoy talking with Ivor. He's got a wealth of information about all of the studies that get thrown around in our community, in our health and fitness community. So it's interesting to hear him analyze them and get to the real meat of some of those studies.
Yeah, it was funny because, like I said, I was at Keto Fest and I was finishing up my talk. And as normal for when you do a talk, there are people who are going to come up after and want to ask you questions and just, say hello or shake your hand, that kind of thing. And so I'm shaking hands, trying to answer questions. And I'm like, the best I can to throw out one-word answers so that I can go see.
Oh.
And he was due to start, and I was like, okay, I want to get over there. I want to get over there. They shortened mine. I got squeezed that year. And so my talk was supposed to be an hour, and they ran late on the one before because they were having issues. And so I was told when I walked up to the stage, I'm like, you're really only going to have about 35 minutes. And I'm like, okay, I'll get it done. But that also meant that I didn't get done early and wasn't really able to do any Q&A. That was one of the things I ended up cutting out of that talk. So I had a lot of people walking up asking questions, and but that's cool. I got there. He wasn't too far in, but he's got this slide and diagram, and I'm like, okay. And then he's talking, and I'm like, this, it's like drinking out of a fire hose, and he's just throwing it on the screen, and it's just so cool. If you're geek out about some of this stuff, go find his YouTube channel and prepare to spend a few hours there, because it's good stuff. He does his homework. He knows what's going on. And yeah, his talk with Dr. Greger, it was kind of a TV debate. I don't think it was set up exactly fair. Ivor's going to come in prepared 3 times, to Sunday, and I think, Dr. Greger, who, I respect it as well, because he has his thought beliefs and his biases and his data, and he goes at it. I don't think he expected a debate. I think he just expected, and he didn't probably expect that the news anchor was going to actually sort of be almost unbiased, or at least acknowledge when Ivor brought up data that they're, of course, Gregor, you can explain why that doesn't make any sense. And he couldn't. I mean, Ivor was right, as he mostly is. But it was great to be able to just talk to him, pick his brain a little bit. I'm definitely going to get him on the show again, because it's just
good.
Yeah, and the people he talks to, they respect him as well, because they see him on the stage and realize, okay, this is a guy who gets it. And so they're
Mhm.
welcome to come on his YouTube and on his channel and have those conversations with him. And that's who he's, traveling with when he's doing the speaking circuit. And so he's got all the connections. He knows all the people, and it's just great conversation.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And it's nice, it was interesting to hear you point out the biases that are often behind the studies. And the reason why that's interesting to me is because we don't hear that. We get the news clipping or the news story that says the study just says coffee is good for you or animal fat's bad for you, but you don't get the behind the scenes stuff that that Ivor was able to talk about. And like the Ansel Keys study, we've talked about that study in the past. It's just one example of a study with some cherry picked data. Then you've got lobbyists involved that are pushing, different food groups or something, or, and so it's hard to know, like you had said, there's a lack of science in food science.
Yeah, well,
it's hard.
The problem is that, one, pretty much any time they've tried to do a food study the right way, they've had to stop the food study. And the reason, and a lot of other studies, because what happens is they have one group eat one way or do one thing, and they have another group do something an entirely different way. And one of them starts really having problems. And then they're like, well, we can't in good conscience, with ethics, continue this study. We're killing people.
That's not good.
Yeah. So
not good.
So what they end up doing is they say, okay, well, tell me, Rachel, how many times did you eat meat in the last month?
Let me think.
Let me think, right.
Right.
And they're like, okay, how many times per week do you eat meat? What kind of, and then it's like, so you eat red meat and processed meat? Yes. Okay. Well, they didn't ask, did you eat meat? Do you eat processed meat? And someone might say, I don't really eat that much processed meat. Deli slices of ham and beef, but other than that, not a lot. And I don't eat a lot of bacon, even though, I'm on the keto spectrum of eating most of the time. I'm not a big bacon person. I actually had half a slice of bacon this morning.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's willpower.
Yeah, well, that was the only piece of stuff, and I didn't want to cook.
Oh, geez.
Because we just made breakfast for 13 people. But, and I wasn't going to throw that out or feed that to the dog.
Right. Oh my
But,
goodness.
it's just that thing of, okay, if they have a bias, they can't help but structure the science to work the way they want it to. And even if they get it right, there's still a likelihood that the data might not be as conclusive as they'd like it to be, which is the worst for scientists, to sit there and have a hypothesis and then do the study and have zero effect, to basically say they can't find even a correlation. They couldn't prove causation necessarily, but they couldn't even find a correlation either way or the other, and so as they're looking at it from that statistical perspective, the study is basically worthless in their minds, because they had a hypothesis and they can't prove or disprove that hypothesis. And that's normally how science works. They try to prove something either is going to happen or not happen based on what they did. You add blue water to yellow water and you get green. That's the hypothesis. And then it kind of depends, right? How much blue water did you pour in and how much yellow water did you pour in? And is it still green or is it blue? And see, so there's even some judgment in there as far as how all that's going to work. And that's a simple thing, that's pretty simple. But when you're asking people what they ate, how much they ate, going back 20 years.
Oh gosh, yeah. It's
and
impossible.
They don't remember. And then, again, of course, if someone is really not eating well, they're probably also not doing other things so well. So they're probably not exercising as much. They might be doing other things like overusing alcohol, maybe using tobacco, maybe using other things. They may be, have very stressful jobs. They might not sleep very well. And so, it's really hard to pull all those confounders out there, because you're not going to find that one person that eats processed meat, but exercises every day, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink, sleeps well, has no stress, but eats processed meat to find out if processed meat causes colorectal cancer. You're not going to find enough of those people to do that.
Right, right. Well, it's almost impossible to set up a study like that. But
Yeah.
you know what we have found in real life, Alan, you and I have both seen and heard stories where people pick up a vegetarian or vegan diet and suddenly they lose a lot of weight. Or in my world, some of us have done the keto diet and we've lost a lot of weight. But even then, it's not about choosing a diet, eating plant-based, eating animal-based. It's the fact that we're eating real foods that were obviously grown on a vine or harvested somehow in nature or a farm, and it's not processed food. And I think that's where people find the success. So, right now it's January, it's the beginning of the year, we're changing our diets and everything. And so sure, we want to, maybe some of us have a goal to eat better. And so we're going to say, well, we're going to eat these healthier food items, but we're getting rid of the processed food. And it's really that one thing that gives us the greatest benefit, is switching from the processed foods, the cereals and granola bars and things that are in a jar or a bag, like you say, and choosing an apple or a salad or, a chicken or something like that. Real foods.
Yeah. And the basis of it is this: processed foods are made to be delicious. They're not made to be nutritious.
Right.
So they're calorie dense, nutritionally weak, whereas whole food tends to be nutritious. It tends to be nutritionally dense and calorie weak. And so you eat to satiety with whole food, you're not going to gain weight, and you'll probably lose weight if you're overweight. If you eat a processed food diet, you're very likely to continue to gain weight because you're just not getting the nutrition you need, and you're getting more calories than you need. And it's just the basic math of calories in, calories out. It's a pretty simple thing, but it goes down to the hormones, because once you tell your body this is real, you're giving your body real food. Okay, let's just be clear about that. There is no pie tree, there's no muffin tree. Don't see all of these, little Debbie cakes on the prairie, roaming around. You just don't. So if we're consuming those things, we're not getting nutrition. And so when they talk about the nutrition from plants, what we know is when a cow is grass fed, they have a better fat disposition than a cow who is not, that's grain fed. The fats in the cow of a grass-fed cow are healthier for us than for a grain-fed cow. The grain-fed cow will taste great. It's fattened up for that purpose. They'll get it perfect. That's a formula. That's what they do. Not that the cow is healthy, but they can make it taste great. That's what companies do. So you'll eat more. And they're able to price it at an affordable price because of the volume they're doing. And so, this is what this is really about, is realizing that every guest that I've had on here, when we talk about nutrition, you've not heard a single one of them say that they think that the Twinkie diet or the McDonald's diet or the whatever diet is okay, because no, they'll acknowledge you can undereat with those diets, but you can't sustain that. So the person that loses, the pounds with the Twinkie diet, or like, what's his name, Penn Gillette, the comedian, magician guy, he did a potato diet. He ate potatoes until he lost the weight, and he got sick of potatoes. He just stopped eating. That's what happened. So the point being is that his dietitian said, just eat potatoes. You'll get sick of potatoes and you'll stop eating. And he did that till he lost the weight. And he's kept it off, which means that he's probably also learned a couple other things, but but at the same time, what he could have done was just said, okay, I'm going to go back to eating whole food. And he probably would have had the same results and been healthier for it. It's an investment, and it's an investment of time, getting to know where your food's coming from. I know no one likes to know how the sausage is made.
True.
But if you start looking at industrial farming and start looking at where, you go into the grocery store and you're picking up those eggs, you're picking up the chicken, and, chickens don't have 3-pound breasts.
Mm,
They
they're
just
not that
don't.
big.
They're not that big.
No.
Uh, we have Dolly Parton chickens now. And it's because the hormones, and they've been bred a certain way. They're not healthy, happy animals. They can't
Mhm.
walk, they can't do anything. They're bred and grown and nurtured to do a certain thing. And it's just not the right way. You
Right.
want happy, healthy animals, and they make for happy, healthy humans.
Yep.
Whether you choose to be plant-based or animal-based or a mix,
Mhm.
just know where it's coming from. Just know what you're eating, and start making better choices. It doesn't have to be a big thing. Just start making
Right.
little better choices, and they add up. They add up fast.
Yep. That's exactly what I say. Yep. Small steps, make some
But when
changes.
you see that headline that tells you something,
Mhm.
question. A new study says,
Beware of those words and
yeah,
look carefully into
new
it.
study says, this, and you're listening, you're reading it, and you're like, well, that's the exact opposite of what they told me last year. That's exact opposite of what I've always known. And we can look at a lot of stuff that's happened in the last few years, about food and other health science. And it's like they're telling you something, and it's like, well, wait, that's not how we talked about this in biology in
Mhm.
school, and this is not how it was taught. So what's different?
Right.
And somehow or another, the doctors or the experts are trying to tell us this is different. It's not. It's not the same. They just wanted it to be different because they wanted us to do a certain thing. So they had a
Right.
bias behind why they said what they said. They had a
Mhm.
bias behind how they planned and did the study, and they got a result. They presented the result, and then the media ran with the headline. And so just
Yep.
be careful when you see a headline and they say, oh, but this is science.
Mhm.
Just be leery that some science is not science. And that's
Right.
particularly true in the health and nutrition space. So
Yeah.
don't knee jerk to sit there and say, oh, I need to start taking 10,000 IUs of vitamin D every day to help my immune system. And the short answer is you might not.
Mhm.
You might need some, but you won't know till you go get a blood test. So just because
Right.
the study said people who took vitamin D were less likely to suffer from this thing, that doesn't mean that study was even done on you. What it could have been 3 high school kids that they gave vitamin D to, and guess what? None of them died in 3 years.
Yep.
So vitamin D helps you live longer. And that's the reality. Their control case, 2 of them got in an automobile accident and died. So, of the 6 people in this piece, all-cause mortality, 2/3 of them died not taking vitamin D. And here in this one, all-cause mortality, all 3 of them are still alive. So
Yeah.
vitamin D keeps you from getting in car crashes is the
Oh.
actual conclusion.
Oh, these studies.
But that's sometimes how this is structured and how it's
Mhm.
interpreted. They're going to use words that are confusing, like all-cause mortality, instead of actually saying heart disease, cancer,
Mhm.
diabetes,
Mhm.
Alzheimer's. Instead of really getting to it, they'll use the term all-cause mortality. Bing. Right there should have bright light on that. Okay, what does that mean, and how did these people pass?
Mhm.
And the data has it. The data, get into the data, and that's what Ivor does. He digs into
Yeah.
that data and says, oh, they were dying of automobile accidents. So what you found was vitamin D keeps people from having automobile accidents.
Weird.
But I'm not saying that vitamin D doesn't.
No.
I'm just saying that if you don't set the study up right and you don't interpret the data right, and you want to change the way the conclusion is worded to give you the result that you were looking for, they do it. They do it all the time
Mhm.
based on who they're funded by, based on what their bias was
Right.
going in, and you just have to be careful.
Well, I appreciate having people like Ivor looking into stuff like
Yeah.
this.
If you ever get a chance to go to a conference or catch up with his YouTube, it's well worth the time and money.
Awesome.
Right, Ras. Well, let's talk again next week.
All right. Take care.
You too. Next time on the 40 Plus Fitness podcast, we discuss how our feelings and emotions might be keeping us from losing weight. Until then, have a happy and healthy week.